The story begins with CEO James, a man who spent years drowning in the relentless pace of city life. Endless meetings, the constant ping of emails, the weight of decisions that affected hundreds of employees. His world was one of steel, glass, and fluorescent lights, where success was measured in profit margins and stock prices. But then came Diep, the quiet force who changed everything. One day, she placed a set of old, slightly rusted farmhouse keys on his polished desk, her eyes holding a challenge: just 1 week. Try it. There was something about the way the afternoon light caught the grooves in those keys, something about the dirt under Diep's fingernails, real, earthy, alive, that made James' breath catch. For the first time in years, he hesitated before reaching for his phone. When they arrived at the farm, James didn't know what to expect. The city had wired him to anticipate problems, to scan for threats, but here, there was only space. Wide, open, breathing space. The first morning, he woke to a silence so deep it felt like a physical presence. No honking cars, no sirens, just the distant call of a rooster and the whisper of wind through the trees. He stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the fields in gold, and for the first time in memory, he wasn't thinking about the next meeting, the next deal. He was just there. The air smelled like damp soil and something sweet, honeysuckle maybe, and when he stepped outside, the grass was cool under his bare feet. Diep found him like that, standing motionless in the garden, his face tilted toward the sun like he was relearning how to breathe. At first, James didn't know what to do with his hands. They were used to gripping pens, tapping keyboards, shaking hands with investors. Now, Diep handed him a trowel and a packet of seeds. "Dig," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. He knelt in the dirt, feeling ridiculous, until his fingers sank into the earth. It was warmer than he expected, soft and crumbling, alive in a way concrete could never be. The first seed he planted felt like a secret, a tiny, buried hope. Over the days that followed, he found himself waking earlier, not to check emails, but to see if the seedlings had broken through the soil. He marveled at the absurdity of it. A man who had closed million-dollar deals now holding his breath over a sprout no taller than his thumb. Diep watched him without comment, but sometimes when James was elbow-deep in compost or laughing at the way the chickens chased after him for scraps, she'd smile in a way that made his chest ache. The farm was her world, and she was letting him into it, piece by piece. One evening, as they sat on the porch with mugs of tea, fireflies blinking in the gathering dark, James realized he hadn't thought about the office in 3 whole days. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Who was he without the title, the pressure, the constant hum of urgency? The fear should have been overwhelming, but instead, there was only a strange, expanding lightness. Then came the afternoon Diep traced the word family into the dirt between them with a stick. James froze, his pulse suddenly loud in his ears. He had spent years building walls, keeping relationships at arm's length. What if he got too close and failed? But Diep's hand was steady, her eyes holding no demand, only a quiet question. Slowly, hesitantly, he hooked his pinky with hers, their hands dirt-streaked and real. The moment hung between them, fragile as a spider's web, until a breeze stirred the leaves overhead, breaking the spell. But something had shifted. That night, lying in bed, James stared at the ceiling and wondered when the idea of a child, of a future so different from the one he planned, had stopped terrifying him and started feeling like possibility. The farm wasn't just a place. It was a slow unraveling, a peeling away of layers James hadn't even known he'd worn. And as the days blurred together, planting, harvesting, sitting in companionable silence with Diep under the stars, he began to understand that this wasn't an escape. It was a return to something essential, something he'd forgotten beneath the weight of being CEO James. Here, in the dirt and the sunlight, he was just James. And for the first time in years, that was enough. James wakes at 3:17 a.m. to an empty bed. The farmhouse is silent except for the creak of floorboards under his bare feet as he moves through the dark. Through the kitchen window, he sees Diep kneeling in the moonlight, her hands buried in the soil of their fledgling herb garden. There's a tension in her shoulders he's never noticed before. When he steps outside, the night air bites his skin. Couldn't sleep? He asks, and Diep startles like she's been caught stealing. The moment stretches too long before she shakes her head, wiping earthy hands on her nightgown. Just checking the basil, she murmurs, but the basil plants are fine. Perfect, even. Over breakfast, James watches Diep stir honey into her tea with mechanical precision. The farm's peace feels suddenly fragile, like morning fog that might burn away. He wants to ask what's wrong, but the words stick in his throat. Instead, he focuses on spreading jam too thickly on toast, the strawberry seeping into the bread like a wound. That afternoon, while repairing the chicken coop, James finds a crumpled envelope in Diep's toolbox. The return address makes his stomach drop. It's from the fertility clinic in the city, the one they'd visited just to talk 2 months ago. The papers inside are smooth, clinical, filled with numbers and percentages that feel like verdicts. He's still staring at them when Diep appears in the doorway, her shadow long across the hay-strewn floor. The silence between them isn't comfortable anymore. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snaps under the weight of unseasonable frost. That night, they lie back to back in bed, both pretending to sleep. James counts Diep's measured breaths, each one a little too even to be real. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the seedlings in their pots on the porch. He thinks about the way Diep had looked at him when they first discussed children, like he'd hung the moon. Now, when he accidentally brushes her hand reaching for the salt at dinner, she flinches like she's been burned. The next morning brings an uncharacteristic June chill. James finds Diep standing motionless in front of the hydrangeas, their petals browned overnight by the unexpected frost. Her fingers hover over the damaged blooms without touching. "We can replant," James offers, but the words sound hollow even to him. Diep nods absently, already walking toward the house. Behind her, a single perfect rosebud, the one James had been checking every morning, hangs limp on its stem. At lunch, the letter from the clinic sits between them on the kitchen table like a third person. James watches a ladybug crawl across its surface, its bright red shell absurdly cheerful against the stark white paper. When Diep finally speaks, her voice is barely audible over the ticking of the wall clock. "What if," she starts, then stops. The ladybug flies away. Somewhere in the city, James' old phone, turned off for 6 months now, probably buzzes with unanswered emails. He wonders if anyone misses him. The thought surprises him with its bitterness. By evening, the rain comes. It drums against the farmhouse roof like fingers impatient for attention. James sits at the window, watching water stream down the glass while Diep pretends to read in the armchair. The distance between them feels physical, a chasm widening with every silent minute. He wants to cross it, but his feet stay planted. Outside, their carefully planted rows of lettuce drown in the downpour. Later, when the storm passes, James finds Diep standing at the edge of their flooded garden. The moonlight turns her into a ghost, pale and shimmering. "We knew it wouldn't be perfect," she says to the night. James isn't sure if she's talking about the crops or something else. He reaches for her hand, and this time, she lets him take it. Her fingers are icy. Above them, the stars blink indifferently. Somewhere beneath their feet, seeds they planted with so much hope wait in darkness, unsure if they'll ever see the sun. The clinic letter burns a hole in James' pocket all morning as he chops firewood with unnecessary force. Each swing of the axe sends splinters flying like tiny accusations. He can still hear Diep's voice from last night. They said 12% chance. 12. The number hanging between them like a death sentence for dreams they barely named. At noon, rain clouds gather again while James is fixing the barn roof. He doesn't notice the darkening sky until the first cold drop hits his neck. By the time he climbs down, the downpour has transformed their dirt path into a muddy river. He's halfway to the house when he spots the unfamiliar Mercedes parked haphazardly by the gate, its shiny black exterior glaringly out of place. Inside, Diep sits stiffly at the kitchen table across from a man in a tailored suit, James' former VP, Daniel. The sharp citrus of city cologne clashes violently with the scent of Diep's chamomile tea. "James," Daniel stands, flashing teeth too white for the countryside. "We've been calling for weeks. The board needs you back. The merger's collapsing without you." James' hands, still dirty from work, leave marks on his overalls as he clenches them. Diep's eyes dart between them like a trapped bird. The clinic papers sit plainly on the table between half-peeled carrots. Daniel follows his gaze. There's a terrible moment where James watches his old life and new life collide in Daniel's widening eyes. The rain worsens. Wind rattles the windows as Daniel lays out his case: triple salary, private fertility treatments, a penthouse near the best hospitals. Each word lands like a stone in James' gut. Diep excuses herself silently, her unfinished tea leaving a ring on the clinic papers. Alone with Daniel, James stares at the steam rising from his own untouched cup. The farmhouse creaks around them. Outside, the chicken coop door bangs open and shut in the storm. Just one meeting, Daniel presses, sliding a plain ticket across the table. It rests half on a carrot peel, half on the fertility report. That night, James lies awake listening to the storm and Diep's measured breathing. At 3 a.m., he finds her in the nursery that isn't a nursery yet, painting the window frame with violent strokes. "You should go," she says without turning around. "Just for the meeting." Her brush slips, leaving a long white scar down the blue wall. The storm breaks a fence post. James spends dawn repairing it, his mind racing faster than his hands. When he returns to the house, he finds Diep asleep at the kitchen table, her head pillowed on the clinic papers. The plain ticket sticks out from under her elbow like a bookmark. Out in the garden, the first sunflower, the one James had nurtured from seed, lies broken in the mud. He lifts it gently, but the stem is severed clean through. The sky is clearing now, sunlight breaking through in golden shafts. Somewhere in the distance, Daniel's Mercedes kicks up gravel as it leaves. James stands at the crossroads of their driveway for a long time, the broken flower in one hand, his phone, charged for the first time in months, in the other. The morning birds resume their singing as if nothing has changed. Inside the house, Diep begins to stir. James stands frozen in the driveway as the morning sun burns away the last of the storm clouds. The broken sunflower stem drips muddy water onto his boots, its once bright face now bowed to the earth. In his other hand, the phone screen lights up with a new message from Daniel. Flight leaves at noon. Car waiting. The words glow unnaturally bright against the soft dawn light. Inside, the creak of floorboards tells him Diep is moving through the kitchen. Through the window, he watches her pause at the sink, her shoulders rising and falling with one deep breath before she picks up the plain ticket from the table. She doesn't open it, just holds it between her fingers like a dead leaf before placing it carefully back where Daniel left it. The distance from the driveway to the front porch has never felt longer. Each step James takes, he notices things: the chipped blue paint on the third stair, the way Diep's garden gloves hang neatly on the hook he built last spring, the faint smell of cinnamon from yesterday's baking still clinging to the doorway. Ordinary things that suddenly feel sacred. When he pushes open the door, Diep is scrubbing the same spot on the countertop over and over, her movements sharp and mechanical. She doesn't look up when he enters, but her shoulders tense. James sets the broken sunflower on the table between them. "I told him no," he says quietly. Diep's hand still. A drop of water falls from the sponge to the floor. James reaches across the table, turning over the plain ticket to reveal the clinic papers beneath. "This is our life now," he continues, tracing the edge of the fertility report with a dirt-stained finger. "Not perfect, not easy, but ours." For the first time in days, Diep meets his eyes. There are tears gathering in hers, but her voice is steady when she speaks. "You didn't even want children when we left the city." The truth of it hangs between them. James looks down at his hands, the calluses from farm work, the dirt no amount of scrubbing seems to fully remove now. Hands that sign million-dollar deals, now carefully staking tomato plants. "I didn't know what I wanted," he admits. "Only what I didn't." Outside, the chickens cluck impatiently for their breakfast. The wind chimes deep-hung last summer sings softly. Ordinary morning sounds. Diep picks up the broken sunflower, her fingers brushing the damaged petals. "It's not just about the baby," she says finally. "It's about..." She gestures vaguely around the kitchen, at the life they've built. James nods. He understands. The city offered solutions, top doctors, expensive treatments, guarantees. The farm offers only patience and uncertain growth. They stand together at the window, watching sunlight creep across the wet fields. Somewhere beneath that soil, seeds are deciding whether to sprout. James feels Diep's pinky finger hook around his, just like that evening on the porch. It's not an answer, not a promise that everything will work out. Just a quiet agreement to keep tending what they've planted, whatever may come. In the afternoon, they replant the frost-damaged hydrangeas together. James works the soil while Diep carefully prunes the dead branches. When she hands him a new seedling, their muddy fingers brush. That night, James builds a fire in the pit behind the house. One by one, he feeds the clinic papers to the flames, watching the percentages and probabilities curl into ash. Diep adds the plane ticket without comment. They sit shoulder to shoulder as the sparks rise into the dark sky, mixing with the fireflies. Somewhere in the city, phones ring and meetings start without them. Here, there's only the crackle of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. The future remains uncertain, but for now, this is enough. This small circle of light in the darkness, this quiet understanding between them. Winter came early that year, frosting the fields before the last tomatoes could fully ripen. James and Diep spent their mornings wrapping the young fruit trees in burlap, their breath hanging white in the air as they worked in comfortable silence. The farmhouse, once filled with summer's open windows, now held the scent of wood smoke and the cinnamon tea Diep brewed to ward off the chill. One particularly bitter December morning, James woke to find Diep's side of the bed empty and cold. He found her in what they'd started calling the maybe room, standing perfectly still in the pale dawn light filtering through frosted windows. She held a paintbrush in one hand and a small wooden rattle in the other, something she'd secretly carved from maple branches during the long autumn evenings. "I dreamed we heard laughter coming from this room," she said without turning around. The raw hope in her voice made James' chest ache. He came up behind her, resting his chin on her shoulder as they both stared at the half-painted yellow walls. Outside, the first snow began to fall, blanketing their dormant fields in quiet. The winter passed in a rhythm of small chores and quieter hopes. James learned to knit clumsy scarves by the fire while Diep read aloud from gardening books. They repaired tools and planned next season's crops, their conversations carefully skirting around the subject of the maybe room, though its presence hummed between them like a held breath. When spring came, it arrived all at once, a sudden warmth that melted the last snowdrifts overnight. James was turning the compost pile when he heard Diep's sharp gasp from the garden. He ran to find her kneeling by the herb bed, her hands shaking as they hovered over a cluster of tiny green shoots pushing through the dark earth. "These shouldn't be coming up yet," she whispered. James crouched beside her, his larger hand covering hers as they both stared at the brave little sprouts that had survived the frozen months underground. Something about their stubborn will to grow against all odds, against the rules of seasons, made Diep's shoulders shake with quiet sobs. James held her there in the dirt, their knees going numb against the cold ground, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Summer returned in a riot of color and noise. The fields exploded with growth, more abundant than either could have imagined after the harsh winter. Visitors from town began stopping by to buy Diep's bouquets and James' honey, their little farm stand becoming a neighborhood fixture. The maybe room stayed empty but no longer felt haunted. Now it simply waited, its yellow walls growing brighter with each passing month. On the morning of the autumn equinox, Diep woke James before dawn with a hand over his mouth and wild eyes. The test was all she needed to say. They sat together on the edge of their bed, shoulders touching, watching as two pink lines appeared where before there had only been one. The sunrise that morning painted the fields in impossible golds and reds, as if the land itself was celebrating with them. When their daughter was born the following spring, it was during a thunderstorm that shook the farmhouse windows. James cut the umbilical cord with hands that hadn't trembled that much since his first board meeting as CEO. Later, when the rain had passed and the midwife had gone, he carried their swaddled baby to the porch where Diep waited in the rocking chair, exhausted and radiant. Together they watched the sunrise over fields damp with new rain. The baby, smaller than any seedling they'd ever nurtured, squirmed in James' arms, her tiny fingers brushing against the scar on his thumb from an old barn repair. Somewhere in the distance, the first bees of the season buzzed lazily toward the awakening flowers. Diep reached over to adjust the blanket around their daughter's face, her wedding band glinting in the morning light. "We should name her after something that grows," she murmured. James thought of all the things they'd planted, the flowers and trees, the quiet hopes, this fragile new life in his arms. He pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead and then to Diep's temple, breathing in the scent of soil and milk and new beginnings. Outside, the farm waited for them, patient and alive, ready for whatever came next. If this story planted something in your heart, tell us what bloomed. Subscribe for more real-life fairy tales, and leave a comment. We read everyone.